morning. It's the first worship service of the brand new year. It's day number 2. It's snowing outside. How cool is that? And I tell you what else. One of my New Year's resolutions was to preach in such a way that I would not put anybody to sleep. Good resolution, huh? So I've got the perfect tool to keep you awake. It'll work. Sounds like one of those stall horns on an airplane when you're. That's what it sounds like. Anyway, believe me. If you hear that noise and you're flying an airplane, you better nose down because you need some airspeed. So good to see all of you with us this morning, and we have a number of visitors in the house. It's good to see Mario's mama with us this week and to get to meet you and to know some of your family, Mario. And we've got newlyweds in the audience this morning. So good to have y'all. We've got a newlywed. The other half is not here. We've got a newly just released from the hospital person here this morning. Good to see Sherry with us this morning. It's good to have some Clarksville brethren with us. I'm sorry that, Tommy Mullins has got the Rona. And so they've come to be here with us today. And, some of the families from the church up there. And so we're glad that you're here with us. I want to preach to you just a little bit about New Year's resolution. You think New Year's resolutions, there's a lot of New Year's resolutions you can have. I'm really just going to talk to you about one. It's the most important one. I think you'll agree with me at the end of the service today. But I wondered, and maybe you have too, why is New Year's such a big deal? Why is it a big deal? I mean, why do we have parties? It is such an interesting thing when you start thinking about it. Why is the end of one year and the beginning of another a celebrated thing? I can understand, holidays, but a new year is a celebrated thing. We don't celebrate new months. Hey, we're getting to the end of this month. February, we're going to have January 31st, we're going to have a new month party. And we don't do that, do we? It's like a big deal. But we get to an end of the year, and we want to have a party. I mean, we have board games. We have finger foods. We have fireworks. Some people go beyond what's authorized in Scripture, and they want to dope up and alcohol up. And then that creates problems for the rest of us. You got to watch those drivers out there. But it's a celebrated thing. And I think probably why it's a celebrated thing is because we celebrate new beginnings. We always are looking forward to something new. And there is anticipation of hope for new beginnings. I can tell you, as for my oldest child, last year's New Year, it wasn't that great. January 1st last year was not a great time for him. And the first few months of this year was spent mostly being sick. This year it's a different story. We have others sitting in this room today who are looking forward to a better year this year than what they had this last year. And I've even seen some people say on Facebook to 2021, don't let the door hit you on the way out. But was 2021 worse than 2020? Or was it just 2020 Part 2? The sequel. But really, even for 2020 and 2021, do you realize that there were souls who found the truth and obeyed the gospel in 2020 and 2021? What can be born out of adversity can be a very good thing. And what about those resolutions? I read somewhere the other day, heard it somewhere that it takes 12 days on average. It's like people stick with their New Year's resolutions for about 12 days on average. But it takes 21 days to form a new habit. And if you want to replace an old habit with a new habit, you've got to give it a month to do that. Because it is a new practice. It is a new normal. I think about this time of year, and I nerd out. Like, why January 1st? What about our calendar anyway? Why are we starting the new year right after the winter has just begun? Why are we starting a new year now? Why don't we start the new year in June, the beginning of summer? Or why don't we start the new year in spring? That really makes more sense. The winter time is really should be at the end. If you think in terms of the seasons of the year and the seasons of one's life, spring has more to do with birth and new life, and then summer is like the prime of life, and autumn is like I'm getting old, and winter time is I'm old and I got a foot in the grave and I'm dying. That's winter. The winter, when we talk about somebody who's in the winter time of life, we're talking about somebody who is declining in health and they are getting their affairs in order. That's what we're talking about. So the beginning of the year really doesn't make much sense to be January, so I started researching this, and of course all the different years over the different centuries and the different cultures, there's been different calendars, and some people were governed by lunar calendars, like the Jews. And this calendar that we're on is a solar calendar. It's how many times it takes to go around the sun. And really, actually, it takes more than 365 days to go for the earth to go around the sun. Actually, it takes a little longer than that. And to reset that, we have every 4 years we have a leap year. So to correct that, we have a Gregorian calendar, and that starts January 1st. It was really, until 153 BC, the first month of the year really didn't, it wasn't January. January and February didn't even exist. It was a 10-month calendar, and then they added 2 months to correct the calendar because of the lunar or the solar cycle. And they called the first month of the year Janus. January comes from Janus. It was a Roman god, and that name means new beginnings. Isn't that interesting? That has nothing to do with your salvation, by the way. That's all free, totally beside the point. But I think it's really interesting how we have 12 months in a year now in our calendar, and what constituted all that. What did God say? Has God said anything about the new year in the Bible? Well, He did. In fact, the Bible tells us in the Old Testament, this is really where it comes from, in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse number 1, to observe, this is for the Jews, to observe the month of Abib. Now, Abib is not a common monthly term. You probably know the term Nisan, not the car, but the name of the month. Nisan was what they called this month Abib after Babylonian captivity. And it's the month that they were to keep the Passover in. It's the first month of their new year. It was the month that they were in when God brought the Israelites out of Egyptian bondage. Exodus chapter 12 and verse number 2, God says, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of months, and it shall be the first month of the year to you." Well, what are they supposed to do with all of this? Because in Exodus chapter 12, you have a record of God's redemptive work to bring the Israelites out of Egypt, and that begins with the call of Abraham at the burning bush. And he says, "I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell him, 'Let my people go.' I want you to go and be a redeemer for the Israelites." And he tells them how to do that. And he begins to tell him, he says that with a mighty hand, I will redeem Israel. What he's really going to do is he's going to launch 10 plagues that we are told actually show that God is bigger and badder than all the other gods of Egypt. He doesn't really come out and say they don't really exist, they're figments of their imagination. God sort of lets them play church with all their little gods. He's just going to show them that He's bigger than all of them. He's going to execute judgment over all of them. And so he uses 10 plagues. The 10th plague is the death of the firstborn of man and beast. And so everybody in Egypt that has a family that had any children, they're going to lose their firstborn child. Any animal in Egypt, they're going to lose their firstborn child. Think about that for a minute. There's lots of dead bodies in Egypt on the night of the Passover. They got a lot of burying to do. There's a big stench in the land. And with that, hard-hearted Pharaoh, which every one of these plagues is designed to harden his heart, it's not designed to soften his heart so that he will be right with God. No, he's already going to take a man who's decided that he does not care about God, the God of the Bible, and so he's going to harden his heart even more, and in his hardness of heart, he will make decisions that are designed for him to hurt himself even more. And it doesn't matter what decisions he makes, it's all going to play into the hand of God to result in the salvation of the Israelites. Because when God says, I'm going to rescue those people, I'm going to get those people, I'm going to deliver them with a mighty hand, I'll deliver them, what he has in mind is he wants to create a real angry Pharaoh that wants to get rid of the Israelites and to the point that he wants them expelled from his land. So that Egypt is on board with the exodus of the Israelites. Only after they get gone, Pharaoh realizes, you know what? I don't realize what I've done. Guys, army, go after them. And so they go after them. They don't catch up to them the next day because God miraculously hides the Israelites from their eyes. And all through the night, he's blowing a wind through the Red Sea, and those waves are parting, the waters are parting, and the wind is blowing in such a way that it dries the very ground of the Red Sea so that the Israelites can cross over the next day. God lifts the veil. He allows the Egyptian armies to see those people crossing the Red Sea, and onward they go. I don't know about you, but if I see a Red Sea parting and there's walls of water on both sides and God's doing it for them, but God's not on my side, I'm not crossing that. Thank you. Where's the common sense? I think it just went out the window. And so the ocean swallowed them up. But you know that story. But what happens is that the night that they're fixing to leave Egypt, that's the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. So where does the Passover come in? Well, the Passover comes in because God says, I want you to prepare a meal. I want you to kill a lamb. It's got to be one of the best ones of your flock. You kill it for your household. And I want you to, when you're skinning that thing, I want you to collect some of the blood, and I want you to apply that blood to the doorpost of your house. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and I will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. So God's going to pass through the land. And as he passes through land, he's going to kill the firstborn. But whenever he sees a house with the blood on it, he's going to say, I'm going to pass over that house. I will pass over that house and not judge it. My judgment will pass over the house. The curse, the plague, the death will pass over the house, and it won't hurt the house. It won't hurt the people in it. That is the concept of Passover. It is salvation in the midst of judgment. My friends, I want you to understand, when we preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, when we ask the question, are you saved? When we talk about your salvation, what we're really talking about is the same thing. When it comes time for God to judge the world through Jesus Christ, because he has appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness, and he has given us assurance of this, in that he hath raised the one that's going to do the judging from the dead. And so we are getting ready for the judgment day. There's a judgment day going to come. We don't know when it's going to come. We just got to be ready for it. And the way you get ready for it is that you have the blood of Jesus Christ applied to your life. And when God sees the blood, He will pass over you in judgment. You will be saved from the wrath to come. And this is what bothers me a lot of times when people say, I got saved this Sunday. By the way, that's not really good theological grammar. You don't got saved or get saved. You are saved. I was redeemed. I was saved. You don't got saved. I don't want to say it myself, and I wish that nobody else would say it. But if somebody says it, I know what they mean. I also know that many people that say it, they don't know what it means. Because I will ask them, you got saved? That's wonderful. What were you saved from? Well, I was saved from my sins. Well, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? Well, my sins were forgiven. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I have a relationship with Jesus Christ. I said, that's great, but what are you saved from? I don't know. Because they haven't been taught what the consequences of unforgiven sin is. The consequences of unforgiven sin is the anger of a righteous God being poured out on you in judgment. It's the big thing in the Bible that nobody ever wants to talk about. It's the thing that we want to like dance around and walk circles around it. We don't want to really deal with the fact that there's a judgment day coming, that people will be lost. And what is the motivation for making any changes, by the way, if I think that God's grace is just going to cover everything, even if I don't have to repent of my sins? So we need to think about these things. We need to talk about these things because there's a lot of people who think they have a relationship with Jesus Christ, but they haven't read the Bible enough to know what they need to do to change. They don't know what they're being saved from and why Jesus has offered His blood on the cross of Calvary for their sins. So Exodus chapter 12 and verse number 12 says, I'm going to pass through the land. Verse 13, and the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be unto you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. Now, I just want to say just a couple of things about Passover in and of itself, because if you think about it, it's the first month of the year, and on day number 10, on the 10th day, they're supposed to take a lamb. On the 14th day, they're to sacrifice the lamb, and then they're supposed to eat this Passover meal with unleavened bread, which, by the way, the next day, the 15th day, begins a week of eating unleavened bread. It's called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So you got two feasts that are really back to back. It kicks off with Passover, and then you got a week-long Feast of Unleavened Bread. And my friends, unleavened bread is symbolic of living a forgiven life. It's symbolic of a sin-free life, a pure life. What did the Israelites do to deserve the Passover salvation? Well, you could say they believed in God and that they heard the prophet Moses tell them what to do and that they were willing to obey and that their faith saved them in that sense. But if you back it up, God was going to come to them with salvation. He was going to come to them with Moses, who was a deliverer for them. Because God heard the groanings of the Israelites in Egypt. And you've got to remember that at that time, they had everything that they'd known about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had pretty much filtered out through the generations. And they'd adopted the gods of Egypt, and they were, you think about it, when God got them out to Sinai, what did they build? A little golden calf. Remember? Where did they get the idea for that? Well, that was already in their system. It took so many years of trying to get Egypt out of their heart and soul. It was very difficult. It was just like you. It's just like me when we convert to Christianity, how we're constantly battling our brain to get the world out of our heads so that we can live the converted lifestyle. That's the way it was with him. But I want you to know that God remembered His covenant with Abraham. That's why you have a Passover in the Bible, brethren. That's why you have 10 plagues, is that God remembers a covenant. It wasn't that these people were so good and they were so righteous and they were so holy, friends. Jesus Christ did not come to this world to save perfect people. He came here to save sinners. Jesus Christ came to this world, and not when we were righteous, but while we were sinners, Christ died for us. This is a promise that is in part fulfilled to a promise that was made to Abraham. This Exodus, this Passover salvation that we read about is tied to the covenant that God made with Abraham. What we're doing here today is tied to a covenant that God made to Abraham. It's all part of the same deal. And so what does the Passover show us? When the beginning of a new year comes for the Jews, when the beginning of the new year came for the nation of Israel, they only had 10 days from the beginning of the month of Abib, which later was called Nisan, until they had to select I mean, it's the period after sunset and before it's actually dark. Twilight. There's still a little bit of light left in the sky from the sun that's just gone down past the horizon, but it's not completely dark yet. In the time that it took for the sun to go completely down to completely dark, they were supposed to eat this meal. What, 5, 7 minutes, most? And then they were going to be going. Eat the meal in haste. He says, don't make bread with leaven. Don't not just make bread without leaven. It's just so you're tempted not to put it in there, or maybe to put it in there without thinking. I want you to put all the leaven out of your house, God says. Get rid of it. Throw it out. And then make your bread. And so Paul says here, he says, you need to put out the old leaven. Purge, therefore, out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. As a people of But how much more do we need accountability in the church? I mean, think about it. If I know what you're struggling with, and you know what I'm struggling with, and I'm not saying that you have to tell anybody what you're struggling with, but if you choose to tell somebody what you're struggling with and you want their help, their spiritual help, you want some encouragement and some guidance and some accountability, that's great, that's fine, that's wonderful. It's nice to have reminders. And how much more should we be reminded to be spiritually engaged? A lot of times, our spiritual growth isn't always a steady upward climb, is it? Sometimes there are setbacks. Did you realize God can use your setbacks as a teaching tool and a motivation to do better? Just look at the life of the great men and women of faith in the Scripture. Were they always making perfect decisions and being all good and everything? I mean, was it always perfect? No. It's never perfect. Nobody's perfect. Nobody has a perfect story. If you think it exists, it's a pipe dream. Our lives are messy. And we mess up. And the goal of Christianity is not to stay messed up, is to get up when we fall down. And so, would you allow yourself the grace of God in your life to be able to stand back up and to get back up when you fall down? Would you at least start with 1 John 2 and say, I'm writing these things to you that you sin not, but if any man sins, we have an advocate with the Father. The goal should be, I'm going to try to do what's right. And when I don't do what's right, when I fail, I'm going to confess my sin to God. I'm going to ask for His forgiveness. And I'm going to move back into that position of doing what's right again. Can you make that commitment? Is that doable? Jesus says it's doable. The lesson is yours. And now you know the New Year's resolution. If you need to respond to the invitation today by obeying the gospel, or maybe you need the prayers of the church, we've got a pew waiting for you right here. We'll receive you.